Katoa.
I call Denise Roach.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. E nā mana, e nā reo, e nā rangatira mā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's my pleasure to take a call for the Greens for this, the final reading of the Ngati Apa, Ki Te Rātō, Ngati Kuia and Rangitane o Wairau Claims Settlement Bill. And I'm mindful that this is a historic day, and I feel absolutely privileged to be speaking on this occasion on the bill while the people who this affects are in the gallery. Before I start, I also want to acknowledge the very many people who have worked on these claims over generations. I salute their tenacity and strength in persisting in bringing these injustices to light. Many who have started this journey have not lived to see the day, and I'm mindful that they're not with us, and we should be acknowledging them too. I recognise that these settlements are part of a healing for the past, for the iwi, and they are also proposed in order for iwi to create a better future. So those who started this process, I acknowledge their faith and their foresightedness. There have been many attempts by these iwi, the three iwi in this bill, many attempts by them to seek reparation, and that goes as far back as straight after the Treaty of Waitangi was signed. But it's only now that they have some acknowledgement. Mr Speaker, it's difficult to do justice to each iwi named in the legislation. Each has a distinct, unique history, although they are linked by whakapapa. I'm pleased that in the settlement deeds for each of these iwi, those histories are told so that their uniqueness cannot be overlooked. Ngati Kuia signed their deed of settlement on the 23rd of October 2010. Ngati Apa Ki Te Rātō signed theirs on the 20th of October 2010. Rangitane o Wairau signed theirs on the 4th of December 2010. So it's taken a few years to get to this final part. And having looked at the deeds of settlements and the historical accounts, it's clear that these iwi are grouped not just because of their whakapapa, but also because of the common injustices that they endured. Essentially, the alienation of these three iwi from their land and resources started when they were caught up in the dodgy land acquisition conducted by the New Zealand company in 1839. When the company purported to have bought the entire top of the South Island with little or no regard to the iwi residing there. When the Treaty of Waitangi was signed a year later, land sales that predated the treaty were deemed to be unlawful, and the Crown set up the Land Claims Commission to investigate the purchases. However, as we've heard and as we've read in the historical accounts, only one Māori person was ever interviewed by the Commissioner. He didn't consult iwi, and after only 2 days, the Commissioner suspended the proceedings when the company asked for an arbitration process that had been used in other areas. And as a result of that arbitration, an additional payment was made by the company to different iwi, and the Commissioner subsequently recommended an award to the company of 151,000 acres, and this was the start of the alienation. But that alienation continued by both the New Zealand company and subsequently the Crown. Their tactics for alienating iwi from the land included pitting Māori against Māori so as to break the collective ownership of the land. And by the early 1900s, iwi resources in that area had dwindled to almost nothing. And this is from the Ngati Kuia deed of settlement, the acknowledged history. By 1900, Ngati Kuia were landless. Ngati Kuia petitioned the government for additional land and described themselves as the poorest tribe under the heavens. The Crown attempted to alleviate their position through the provision of landless natives reserves, and we've heard how little that meant as well. But to continue, The reserves, however, were in isolated locations of poor quality, generally unable to be developed for effective economic use. Ngati Kuia were also allocated land on Stewart Island, but the Crown never granted them title to the land, and ultimately these reserves did little to alleviate the landless position of Ngati Kuia in Te Tau Ihu. It was a similar situation for Rangitane or Wairau and Ngati Apa ki te rātou. With few resources, the people suffered, and the iwi have been carrying this hurt for generations. The settlement deed also contains the apologies that the Crown has offered to the iwi and which has been accepted, and that's now in the legislation as well. And it's obvious that the acknowledgements by the Crown and the apologies for their actions and omissions where the Crown breached the Treaty of Waitangi, that they're obviously sincere, but it is an act of generosity by iwi to accept that. Here's an example of one of the apologies. The Crown profoundly regrets its long-standing failure to appropriately acknowledge the mana and rangatiratanga of Rangitane. The Crown did not recognise Rangitane when it purchased the Wairau district in 1847, and recognition of Rangitane mana until Waipaunami purchase was belated. The Crown is deeply sorry that its acts and omissions quickly left Rangitane landless, and that this has had a devastating impact on the economic, social and cultural well-being and development of Rangitane. I think it's important that these words are in the record. In the context of the losses, the compensation packages are quite small. In financial redress, Ngati Apa ki te rātou has a package that totals $28.3 million. Ngati Kuia's financial and commercial redress package comes to $24.8 million. For Rangitane or Wairau, the financial redress package is $24.3 million. And I make the point here that even when you add that up, it's only a fraction of what Southern Finance Company got quite recently. And they didn't lose their land. Cultural redress includes small parcels of land and includes some symbolic vesting of significant land to iwi, and then continuing that generosity, the iwi give them back to the people of New Zealand. The alpine tarns and lakes, Rotoiti and Rotoroa and Nelson Lakes National Park, for example, will be vested in Ngati Apa and then gifted back to the Crown. The cultural redress also includes enshrining the rights of iwi to some of their food resources, and I hadn't seen this before, so I thought it was really interesting. So, for example, Ngati Apa can apply to the Minister of Conservation to take eels from the Nelson Lakes National Park, and Rangitane, judicious hunting of titi. There's other cultural redress as well. The purpose of it is to enshrine the status of iwi as kaitiaki in their rohe. Mr. Speaker, no treaty settlement is without controversy, and I have not dwelt on that here. However, I do wish to state that the Greens do not ever see these settlements as full and final, not while the Crown determines who's in and who's out, and when we cannot know the impact that these sad histories may have on those yet born. And of course, it's not full compensation anyway. But having said that, I recognise that there's a delicacy and a balance that these settlements represent, and the treaty settlement negotiators from the iwi should really be acknowledged and recognised for that. And I also recognise that this is a day to celebrate for the iwi that are here. Without doubt, you will be on a better economic footing than you have been for 160 years. Your future is far more secure than your past has ever been. So we wish you well. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker.
Paul Joe Hayes.
Tēnā koutou e koro mai kui mai rau rangatira mā. E ngā whānau mā,